Today is the 21st anniversary of a little girl's disappearance and death.
In a world full of murderers, the death of a 6-year-old girl has been haunting this family since 2002. When a 6-year-old innocent girl is forced, kidnapped, and beaten to death, it's not only unfair, but it leaves a taxing burden on the family for a lifetime. This story delves into the murder of Casey Williamson, how it happened, who was the killer, and whether she received justice or not. Today, Cassandra Casey Williamson should have been 28 years old, but whatever hopes and dreams she and her family had were taken away as her life was snatched from her when she was around 21 years old. A man who was described as a family acquaintance not only robbed Casey of her life, but did more damage to her family that still haunts them to this date. People around Casey describe her as a happy girl with a cute smile who loves riding a bicycle and singing. 2 days before her death, she was actually singing joyfully, not knowing what kind of terror awaited her in the dark. Casey was born on November 23, 1995, to Ernie and Angela Williamson. Her family would have 4 children together, and Casey was the second oldest. However, her parents had a rough marriage, and they separated. So, Angela had to take her kids to live with her relatives in Valley Park, Missouri. Moreover, her father, Ernie, lived close to them, renting a room at the house just across the street where they lived. Even though Casey's parents were divorced, she was close to her father, and even stayed at his house a lot of other times. Even at such a young age, everyone would describe Casey as smart, hardworking, and talented. She was quite an energetic 6-year-old kid with a contagious smile and a vibrant vibe. Moreover, Casey was also a member of a Protestant church near her home, and even participated in youth activities. All of these things go to show that she had a very bright and exciting future ahead, if it wasn't for that one night. Casey also had an older sister, who we also lost long ago. Her sister described her as a fun-loving, happy, and big Britney Spears fan. But how did all of their happy lives turn into a bleak and dark nightmare that would destroy the family until no more repair could be done? Who was behind this mystery murder that shook the family, causing Casey's uncle to get insanely infuriated and her parents to be forever traumatized? The man behind this murder was Johnny Johnson, a man who claimed to be a vampire, and if he's killed, the devil himself will come to the face of the planet and absolutely destroy everything. So let's talk about this murderer and how the whole crime even happened. By 2002, Casey was undoubtedly a vibrant kid with a bright future ahead. And on July 25th, 2002, Casey and her family were staying at an acquaintance over for drinks. The acquaintance was the 24-year-old Johnny Johnson, a guy who was known to be a drifter and would occasionally settle down. He wasn't suspicious of anyone and personally knew everyone. Angela Williamson, the mother of Casey, actually knew Johnny since their childhood, and neither she nor Ernie felt he was a threat to anyone. But that's exactly where things took the darkest turn. On July 26, 2002, when Ernie came back from the bathroom to prepare his daughter's breakfast, he noticed that both Johnny and Casey were gone. It was around 7:30 in the morning when both disappeared from the house in Valley Park. It was 8:30 a.m. when police found Johnson walking down the streets, but something about him was different. His clothes were full of mud and were soaked. However, Johnson told everyone he went swimming in the nearby Merrimack River. There was no sign of Casey, and everyone started panicking. But this is where the prime suspect, Johnson himself, was taken to the police headquarters for questioning. But things took a darker turn when a witness saw Johnson carrying a little girl in the morning. Everyone instantly knew it was Johnson who did something to the little girl, and as they heavily interrogated the prime suspect, the police searched vigorously for the little girl. Johnny Johnson was born on March 16, 1978 in Missouri. He was the youngest of 4 children and lived with his mother, who raised him. As his mother was working as a nurse's aide at the local nursing home, Johnson had a lot of time by himself, but grew up to be poor. His father left him when he was only 2 years old and died in 1999 due to diabetes. His grandfather also died in front of him, and all that trauma led him to develop some mental issues at a very young age. Johnson was often deemed as a small and weaker kid, and was known to be a weak kid whom everyone would refer to as Pee-wee. Growing up, Johnson had difficulty studying and learning new things, and his mind seemed exceptionally slower than others. However, like a lot of other psychopathic killers, Johnson did have one skill that was impressive, and it was sketching. But even with a great talent for sketching, he struggled in various aspects of his life, which ultimately led Johnny to cut his wrists so badly that he required medical attention. Even at a young age, he loved inflicting pain on himself, and of the 4 kids in the family, 3 of them had criminal records. In 1997, Johnny pleaded guilty to burglary and felony and was given 3 years of probation. And just a year later, he also pleaded guilty to felony theft, stealing a firearm, and being involved in a burglary. These charges developed to Johnny from stealing an ATV and firearm from homes, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. However, Johnny had another skill that led him to become unnoticed as a criminal. He was exceptionally good at gaining trust. Even though he was sentenced to prison for 7 years, he was released just 4 months later due to good behavior. While he was on probation, things only worsened for Johnny. He was caught with drug paraphernalia and alcohol by a minor, and was even charged with the destruction of property. Even though he was charged with these violations, he remained free. During this time, he also met a woman who had a child with him. 2 kids, to be exact. He took care of the boys and acted like a house husband, while his girlfriend worked. He would take care of his kids, even though his family was concerned about whether he was even fit to raise a child. But that's where Johnny had another violation of his probation. Being in such a messed up mental state, Johnny was supposed to be confined to the St. Louis Psychiatric Rehabilitation Center, where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And in order to understand the full story of the murder of Casey Williamson, you'll need to understand what exactly schizophrenia is. Schizophrenia is a mental illness that promotes hallucinations, delusions, and extremely disordered thinking in the viewer's head. Patients with this disease usually require a lifetime of treatment. Even back in the day, the judge asked the facility to understand whether Johnson was a threat to himself or the others. But a favor was on Johnson's side, so he lived with his grandmother, who could continually schedule appointments with doctors at the hospital. From January 9th, 2002 to the summer, Johnny's girlfriend and siblings noticed that he was again failing to meet his probation officer, and everyone was worried about him since he was spending more and more time in Valley Park, drinking and crashing on random people's homes. And while nobody knew what he was capable of, most people had this idea that Johnson was just a harmless guy. This was the timeline in the summer of July 2002, when Johnson committed such a horrific crime that took the life of an innocent 6-year-old girl, Casey Williamson. Being several hours under deep investigation and interrogation, Johnson finally admitted to kidnapping the innocent Casey Williamson. It happened on the morning of July 26, 2002, when Johnson said that he asked Casey if she wanted to go with him to the glass factory. He then picked her up and rode to the factory near their home, where he led her into a pit with 6-foot-tall walls. He even admitted to exposing himself to Casey, tearing her underwear off, and attempting to rape her before killing her by hitting her with a brick multiple times on her head. And while Casey was still moving, he took a large boulder, dropped it on her head, and then buried her body under a rock and left. That's when he was found in muddy clothes soaking wet because he went to the river to wipe off all of the blood from his body. While he was describing his own actions, the search crew found Casey's body, and according to the police reports, it was right where Johnson told them, which was in the glass factory that was abandoned. Casey's body was found under large rocks with severe skull fractures, and the cause of death was found to be blunt force trauma to the head. This case developed into a homicide, and Johnson was charged with first-degree murder, attempted criminal action, kidnapping, and rape. The general public was devastated, and the community of Valley Park rallied around the Williamson family, creating a memorial with stuffed animals and notes of love. But it was so late. The poor girl lost her life. Casey's older sister said that she realized that Casey is in a better place. Her older sister also said that she always found Johnny Johnson as someone who was creepy and would walk around the neighborhood staring at Casey and the other little girls. And at trial, the defense didn't deny the thing that Johnny was claiming, but the defense pointed at Johnson's untreated mental illness, which deranged his thinking capabilities and could be the reason that he murdered the little girl. But there was more than just mental illness involved here. While it was possible that part of it could have been his schizophrenia, The prosecution said that Johnson indeed planned the murder because he lured Casey away from him. It was a clear attempt to rape her and then kill her in order to avoid being identified as the killer. The prosecution also suggested that the act of washing up the blood from his body meant that he knew that he had to hide the evidence of his crime. However, the defense counter-argued and said that he can't turn off those voices like you turn off a radio or turn off a television. The case kept on going, and in January of 2005, 3 years after the death of Casey Williamson, Johnny Johnson was found guilty of first-degree murder, armed criminal action, attempted rape, and kidnapping. His heinous nature of murder was noted due to his attempted sexual assault, the victim's age, and that he later killed the innocent child. Considering all his mental illnesses, including his inability to learn, trouble in school, and suicide attempts, the jury recommended the death penalty for Johnson, and he was sentenced to death, plus 3 life sentences that would run simultaneously. At the time of this crime, the judge himself called this crime the most heinous crime he'd ever seen on his bench. Now, Johnson believed that his defense did not properly present his claims of brain damage, which led to him receiving such a hefty sentence. He also said that if the defense attorney had asked for brain testing, he could have been prevented from receiving a capital punishment. However, the overall case review noted that a neuropsychologist did some testing on Johnson and found out that his thinking capabilities weren't too bad to the point of retardation. But he does have an organic brain syndrome combined with significant psychiatric disorders, and those are permanent conditions for him. All these claims were denied by the court, and a lot of people even supported Johnson's case and told the jury to cancel the case. While the case itself became quite complex, let's look at some of the facts that were directly mentioned in the document of this case called State vs. Johnson. Some of the notable facts are as follows. 2 days before Casey's murder, on July 24, 2002, Johnson went to Michelle's house looking for Ernie and Eddie. The same day, he was playing with Casey's sister, Chelsea, and her friend Angel when they were riding bikes on Benton Street. Moreover, Chelsea and her friend actually noticed Johnson following them, so they sped up the bike and returned home. That same night, Angie took the children to Michelle's house to spend a night with Ernie. Johnson also stayed at Michelle's house. On the next morning, Angie or Angela found Casey on the couch watching cartoons with Johnson. Johnson even told Angela that Casey wasn't bothering her. Moreover, at the same time, Johnson began to think that Casey was cute and had various ideas about being romantically involved with her. And that same day, Angie took the children back to Ernie's house. When everyone was at Ernie's house, Angela saw Johnson sitting by himself on a chair by the deck and locked the door. She even heard knocking but did not answer the door. And in the evening of July 25th, Johnson joined in a barbecue at Michelle's house, where the siblings decided to spend the night with their father at Michelle's house. This was the background for the case, and we all know what happened the next morning. On July 26th, 2002, Ernie woke up at around 6 a.m. to go to work, and Casey woke up, telling her dad that she was hungry. So he was preparing the food and told her to wait upstairs. He went downstairs to notice Johnson was sleeping on the couch. This was when Casey went downstairs to watch cartoons, and Johnson woke up and sensed that it was the best opportunity for him to sexually exploit. In order to avoid being caught, he asked Casey if she wanted to go to the glass factory to play games and have fun. So she said yes. She didn't ask for permission from her dad, or Johnson might have manipulated her and avoided the whole situation. At this point, Casey was only wearing her nightgown and underwear. So as they were walking down Benton Street, Casey's foot started to hurt, and Johnson gave her a piggyback ride. They started walking along one of the paths to the sunken pit with brick and concrete walls that were more than 6 feet in height. Both of them crawled through a small tunnel and dropped into a pit. Knowing that this was the best opportunity for him to use her, Johnson asked Casey if she wanted to see his male private part and forced her to look at his private parts. Johnson then forcibly tore her underwear off and pinned her to the ground, where he attempted to do horrific things to her. Casey then started screaming and pushing, even scratching Johnson's chest. And even though she was not raped yet, Johnson got up and decided to kill her. He took a brick nearby and hit Casey with it at least 6 times, which basically gave her so much head trauma that she was already passing away. She wasn't dead or knocked unconscious. She was trying to run across the pit, so Johnson hit her on the head again and again till he fractured the right side of her skull. This is where Casey was half dead, but still moving. So Johnson took a basketball-sized boulder and crushed her head. According to the case files, she inhaled and exhaled really fast and then stopped breathing. Johnson then wiped the blood from her face with her underpants and threw them in an opening in the wall. He even buried Casey with rocks, leaves, and debris from the pit and instantly ran away to the nearby Merrimack River to wash all the blood he had on his body. Officer Chad Lewis met Johnson, and he was instantly taken to the police office. Without any questions being asked, Johnson said that he would never hurt little kids, and he liked them because he's got kids of his own. He then made up this false story that he went to the river to swim, and even denied that he wasn't in the glass factory. That's where the story develops more. These were some of the details that were worth mentioning because we only see a gist of Casey Williamson's story on the internet. But that's not where Johnson's lies stop. When he was caught, Johnson started crying and said it was an accident. He took Casey to the glass factory, where a giant pit fell over her head, but it was too weak of an excuse. In the end, the autopsy showed that Casey died from blunt force injuries to her head, which also caused skull fractures and bruising of her scalp and brain. She also had other injuries on her arms, legs, back, and shoulders. Moreover, blood was found on Johnson's shirt, and Johnson's semen was found on his shorts. At trial, Johnson didn't really deny killing Casey, and blamed it all on his schizophrenia. So, after years of fighting the trial, how is Casey's family doing today? A recent interview with Casey's mother on July 27, 2023 was taken, which marked the 21st anniversary of the little girl's disappearance. Even though Casey's killer, Johnny Johnson, was set to be executed in mid-July, his case received a federal stay of execution, and Casey's mother had a lot to say. In the interviewer, Angela told Fox 2 St. Louis that her family had been completely destroyed after Casey's case. Casey's mother says that sometimes it feels like it's been forever, and sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday. We can see how sad she is, even 21 years after the death of her precious daughter. And even though it was the ultimate death penalty for Johnny Johnson, after receiving the story of the postponement of Johnny's execution, Angela was sad. She wanted to see the killer pay for his crime and suffer. Angela was told her situation as a walking zombie for around 10 years, and also told that her father and brother were the ones to identify Casey's body. She also said that her brother had a mental breakdown, and that her father drank himself to death. It was more than the death of a young child. It was more than the death of a whole family. But there's even more. According to Angela, she also lost her oldest daughter around 8 years ago, and she said that her oldest daughter could never accept life after what happened to Casey. But did Johnny Johnson pay for his crime? Or was justice not served? Well, we've got some latest news. The Missouri Department of Corrections carried out Johnny Johnson's execution for the murder of Casey Williamson on August 1st, 2023. It happened at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bourne Terre, Missouri. The 2002's execution was about to be halted till the public showed their anguish toward Johnny Johnson. The execution method chosen for this case was a lethal injection, and the criminal was declared dead at 6:33 p.m. According to the report, the last statement that Johnny made was, "God bless. Sorry to the people and family I hurt." After the frustration that Angela showed to the court and her inability to stay sane for over 2 decades, the court decided that it was time Casey Williamson got justice.